Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be interviewing to get to those books that have impacted their work, their business, their life, even if they're the author and or not. So it's just to get to really those books that have impacted all of those lives, all of those worlds that they operate in, all of those intersect. So the three categories of books that I cover in this series: the first category, they're sharing a book with me that I haven't read. The second category, where we're covering a book that we've both read, whether specifically for the episode or in our past lives before the series. The third category is when I get to have the author and or publisher of the book to bring a face, to give a tone, to give a story, a backstory to the book that they're getting out there to the masses. And my guest today is Sara Mueller. And Sara is a Harvard-trained emotional intelligence expert, international award-winning executive coach, and the best-selling author of The Balanced Life Blueprint. As the CEO of Joy Discovered, she helps managers become leaders and engaged teams that deliver remarkable service. Sara is an executive contributor on leadership for Brains Magazine and serves as a subject matter expert on mental health, mental well-being for Florida's State Health Improvement Plan. Prior to founding Joy Discovered, she spent nearly 2 decades developing service optimization programs for Fortune Global 500 executives and teaching mindfulness to clients from the NFL Combine to behavioral health centers. Sara's on a mission to conquer mediocrity, and her work has helped thousands of people live and lead with connection, courage, and authenticity. And the way that I came across Sara's work, I have no idea. Something popped up in my LinkedIn feed. I don't know if it was uh, a post that Sara put in front of me that LinkedIn thought I would find interesting, or somebody that I'm connected to reposting or engaging with her post. In any case, it was a post about her book. I found the title fascinating, looked up the book, looked into it more, reached out to her, see if she'd sit down with me for a conversation. Here we are. So Sara, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
So, peculiar word, even before I jump into the first question in my script of standard questions,
Sure.
the word mediocrity. We'll probably get into that when it comes to where that comes from in your past life, how you think about it. But right off the bat, it just jumps out. So what does that mean? Where did that come from for you?
Sure. So I really want to take a stand against mediocrity because I believe that we are all capable of way more than we imagine for ourselves. So as a coach, I can see this in other people and help to draw more out of them. And, I really believe that this life is meant to be loved and embraced, and that there's magic in the everyday and beyond. And my business name is Joy Discovered. And I believe also that we can have joy in our work and in our relationships at home and across the board. And so it's really encouraging people to break free from status quo, from basics, from just kind of getting by and moving through the days and really having it all and creating a life that they love. And
Just
also
really,
leading in a way that is producing remarkable results, both personally and professionally, for ourselves and
yeah.
our team.
Yeah, it's that proactivity, that really stepping up, not being passive, not letting you pass you by, whether it is work, whether it is your personal life, whether it is a business, whatever it may be, right?
Yes. And I think so many of us, we get stuck in a rut. We get stuck in the busyness of life. We are afraid to make a change or do the thing that's been on our mind. And so that's really, rather than just staying on that hamster wheel of life, like, let's create the life of our dreams and live in a state of joy.
I love it. So the first question that I usually have, thank you for that answer, by the way. Who are you today, Sara, in terms of what is the work that you're doing? I read the great bio, the great history that you have. What does the work look like with your clients? What kind of programs do you offer? What does it look like? Just so we can give the listener and the viewer a sense of who it is that is sharing the book with us.
Yes. So I work in two distinct ways. Emotional intelligence is really my specialty, and that's woven into my book. And I work with leadership teams to help them to improve their emotional intelligence, which really makes them to have those soft skills and those human people skills that are necessary as a manager, as a leader. So I do leadership workshops, trainings, half day, full day. I do executive coaching for managers who are, great performers at the technical aspects of their job, but need more of these human to human relationship skills to pull the greatness out of their team. And then I also work with people on a more personal side. So I have a coaching program that's built around my book that is helping both men and women to create balance in their life so that they are thriving in their relationships, in their parenting, in their career. So I work with a lot of high achievers who kind of checked off those boxes of success, but are sort of feeling like, okay, really, is this all that there is right now? How do I tap into that joy and that
Yeah.
purpose in my work? So both professionally, leadership teams, and personally is how I offer my emotional intelligence services.
So to dive a little further, to get a little more insight into who you are, to understand how you ended up here, can you walk me through it's typically I ask just how you got here from whether it's the end of high school or when you entered the workforce, what the pivot points were in your life. What did that path look like from then to now to get to where you are today and the work that you're doing today?
Sure. So one area that I want to start with, it's a little bit earlier than I normally share in my story, is
That's
I went to
fine.
college and studied communication and psychology, which are major aspects that I tap into now when working with my clients. But I graduated from college and thought, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to go out into the real world. I don't feel like I really know anything about the real world, and yet I'm supposed to get a job. And so I actually went and lived in Brazil for 4 months and did a cultural immersion program. So I was volunteering at orphanages and AIDS orphanages and other places half the day. And then I was immersed in the culture of Salvador in the state of Bahia, where I was living at the time, and just learning about a different culture. And there were a lot of other international volunteers that were there with me that I got to know from Europe and Australia and other parts of the US. And that really opened my eyes up to this beautiful big world that we live in and the multitude of experiences that we have. So that kind of planted the seed of, whoa, I grew up in a farm town, a small little town in the middle of Minnesota where there was, cornfields, and that was my first job. And this helped me to start expand and see possibility, which I think leads into sort of that earlier conversation that we had about moving away from mediocrity.
So, Sarah, even before you jump to the next phase or whatever the next step is in that
Sure.
story, how do you end up in Brazil? Because even when you were saying, before I went to college, I wanted to try something different, do something different, maybe not make that jump right away. The last thing I imagined you saying was, so I went to Brazil. So how did you end up in Brazil? How did that, cross your
I
path?
Sure. So I had a friend who did a semester abroad in Lima, Peru, and she did it with an organization called Cross Cultural Solutions. And she had a wonderful experience with that. And so I started looking into their different programs. And they had a program in Brazil and a program in Thailand, both places that just piqued my interest. They had many other programs as well, but I chose Brazil because it was on the ocean and I love the beach. Now I live on the beach here in Naples, Florida, but that was how it came to be. Inspiration from a good friend.
Absolutely. Okay. So from there into college, or what was the next step?
So Brazil was after college. That was before I
Okay.
went and got my real world job. And so I came
Gotcha.
back from Brazil, did some work. I made my way to New York City, wanted to really experience the opposite of the small town that I grew up in. And and then eventually made my way to Naples, Florida. But really what led me to, writing my book and the work that I do now is I was in a deep place of burnout. I was a high performer in the work that I was doing, but I was stressed out all the time. I was worried about my job constantly. I was, trying to get a good night's sleep at nighttime, but it was like I had just chugged a can of Red Bull and my mind was running sprints in my head. And I was just unfulfilled and stressed. And I was drinking a glass or sometimes a bottle of wine a night to try to forget about how unfulfilled I felt. And I realized, of course, that I couldn't keep going on this way. And I had started studying yoga and becoming a yoga teacher. on the side. And I thought, well, I really love this yoga thing. Let me go teach yoga full time, thinking that a more peaceful type job would be the answer to all of this stress and challenge that I was feeling. And what happened after I was a yoga teacher full time for just a couple months is I realized that nothing had changed in my life. I mean, the only thing that changed was my paycheck was a lot smaller because I was, a corporate executive building training programs for Fortune 500 executives. And now I'm a yoga teacher. So I realized that the stress and the burnout was because of me, that I was the common denominator. It wasn't the job, it wasn't the relationship, it was me. I also had a rock bottom moment at that time with my husband in our marriage. And it really just, those rock bottom moments that we have as humans really push us to that next level of growth. And so from this state of pain, I started to crawl my way out of this sort of hole that I had put myself into. And it was through the tools of emotional intelligence that I was able to grow and to change my life. And I really went back. I actually went back to that corporate job, but I had a new set of skills from emotional intelligence. And I had a lot more success in that job. I worked less hours. I got more done. I was able to connect more with my team. I was able to lead better and really have fun and joy in my work, even make more in profit share. I also was able to heal my relationship with my husband at that time. And it was really cool because after he went through his own emotional intelligence journey as well, but after we came back together, we gave birth to our first son. And the extra special blessing behind that, and all children are blessings, all, babies, grandbabies, fur babies are blessings, but he was an extra special blessing for us because we had tried to get pregnant before we had done this work of emotional intelligence, and all of those pregnancies had ended in miscarriage. But now, once we had sort of taken care of ourselves, we were able to bring a baby into this world. And because my life switched so drastically, both personally and professionally, because of the path that I went on, I just knew that I had to write this book and I had to share it with others. And that really became, my first coaching program and the outline for this book that I published in 2024.
So where did emotional intelligence pop up in your story? Just because you said you were doing the yoga work, you were working things out with your husband, and then you went back to the other job and now you had the tools of emotional intelligence. But where did that cross your path? How did that come to the surface? When did you make that realization of emotional intelligence and working in that manner?
Yeah. So when I was in this space of, oh my gosh, my marriage could be ending and I hate my job and I'm not making any money. And I was just in this burnout, rock bottom place. I was referred to a therapist from a friend. I started working with business and mindset coaches. And it was all work that was helping me to go inward and look at myself and to understand that I needed to better know myself so that I could manage myself and manage my emotions and be able to relate with others on a personal and professional level, which is really, that's really what emotional intelligence is. So I was introduced to it through therapy and business and mindset coaches and, fell in love with that work. I was even introduced to it in yoga teacher training because part of our yoga teacher training, of course, was to teach people how to do the physical poses of yoga, but it was really about how can I stand in front of a room of strangers and be authentic in order to inspire them to show up most powerfully on their yoga mat and to be themselves. So all of these are little aspects of EQ, which is the abbreviation that I use for emotional intelligence, that I started to be able to implement into my life.
So what did the path look like from your corporate job? You said you went back to your corporate job. What did it look like from there to launching your own company to writing the book? What did that path look like, making that connection?
Yes. So I did the corporate job with this new set of EQ skills for many years and kind of always felt this little pull that I needed to do something more, that I was meant to do something more. And I started in 2017 my coaching business as a side hustle. I built my business on the side while I had two young babies at home and was also, had this big corporate job. And was able to balance all of that. And after a couple years of doing that part-time, I took the leap and did that coaching business full-time, all while I was, you know, starting to put my book together, knowing that I wanted to write this book. I had called myself an author, even though I hadn't published the book, but I had published a weekly blog post for years and years and years, starting in 2017. And as I was building my coaching business, I was writing the book and sort of working on both of those at the same time, which was a little challenging because it was almost like two babies that I was bringing into the
Yeah,
world.
you had 4 babies in total.
Yes, I did. I did. And so I think the book took me a little bit longer just because I was building these four babies, as you said, but that was my process, and it's how it turned out.
So can you speak just a little bit about that process? What was your process for balancing all that? How long did it take you to write the book?
So probably I would say 3-ish years. I would get really into it, and then I would sort of get distracted and work on my business or life, and I really believe in showing up powerfully for my family and for fun and all of those things. Like that's part of my message. And so balance, my book is called The Balanced Life Blueprint, but balance doesn't look like everything's 50% or equally distributed. It's really
Mm,
about having the appropriate proportions based on where you're at in your
yeah.
life. And so I think the book just it would take a front seat and then it would take a back seat. But I was most successful when I gave myself teeny tiny goals to stay consistent with writing it every day. So there were times where I was like, well, I'm going to write a chapter this week, or I'm going to sit for an hour and write every morning. And those were too big of goals for me. So when I was most consistent in getting the book written was when I said, I'm just going to write for 10 minutes today, or I'm just going to write 150 words. Teeny tiny bite-sized pieces is when I was able to show up and be consistent, because we really all have 10 minutes. Sometimes it feels like we don't, but we can create 10 minutes for what's most important for us. And so when I broke that little goal down, that's when I was more consistent and started to really make headway on the book. And then I think one of the important pieces is, I was learning and growing through that process, and I kept going back to my book and updating it with all this new information that I was learning. And I finally realized, I need to just publish the book as it is and let everything that I'm learning now be book number 2, because otherwise this book's never going to be ending, because we're always human. As humans, we're always growing and we're always developing. So it's like, let this be what this was, and everything I'm learning now could be my next
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. I was talking to somebody on Monday, having this conversation with them about a book they wrote. And I'm always curious about artists, whether it's musicians, whether it's movie filmmakers, whether it's an author. I always wonder, not that I want them to break down the work that they already put out, but I always wonder, do you look back at your work and say, I should have wrote this a little different, or, oh, what if I had done this? But like you said, it's kind of like you have to close that chapter, publish it. You did the best that you could with the knowledge you had at the time, and then leave any kind of alterations you would make in your thinking for the next book. So that's a great point that you bring up.
That was hard, because it's, you want to put your best work forward, but I had to realize where I was trying to be a perfectionist versus putting the best work out there and letting it speak for itself for that point of my life. So yes.
So at what point in all of this, in your career and your path and your family, your writing, your blogging, at what point does that idea of mediocrity really sink in the way that you look at it, in the way that you want to be more proactive, in the way that you say, in all of these factors that may not be going right, I'm the common denominator, so I have to change something within myself. At what point, if you do remember, did that idea of mediocrity really set in and kind of turn your thinking on performance and what it means to really show up for yourself?
I think that I was looking at the clients that I was working with and who my work attracted, and it really attracted, people that we maybe call high achievers or high performers. But it was more about people who really wanted to show up powerfully, both at home and at work. They wanted to be able to have an awesome career and be an awesome parent. And that was really what important to me. So it makes sense that I would attract people who believe that they could have both. Sometimes people weren't sure they could have both, and that's why they worked with me or read the book. But I really believe that we can have it all and to create this life that is full of joy where we can show up powerfully at work and home. And so it was looking at my clients and realizing they were not the ones who are just going to sit back and not take radical responsibility for themselves. My clients were the ones who really believed that something bigger was possible for them. And so I wanted, I looked at this is excellence. This is greatness. This is what I'm seeing in other people. Even when I was teaching yoga, and maybe now that I'm talking out loud to answer your question, I remember every time that I would teach someone in yoga, they would always be able to do a different pose in a stronger or better or more ease-filled way, more than they thought was possible for them at first. And so I started witnessing people showing up more powerfully on the yoga mat. I started witnessing that in my clients and being able to really pull the greatness out of others. And now I work with leaders to help them be able to pull the greatness out of their own teams so that they can have high performance. So those are a few different, I don't know if there was that one specific moment, but those are a few different things that helped me to latch on to really fighting against mediocrity.
No, I appreciate that. Sarah, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing? Not that you knew that this was the exact path you were going to take, but I'm always curious about the people that I talk to, how who they were as a child shows up in their work today. Because I think so much of what people forfeit when they are that leads them to being unfulfilled is that they give up that part of themselves, that part that's seeking wonder, that's seeking awe, that's seeking greatness, excellence, that's curious. When they go back and find that and really are honest with themselves, that's when they start becoming fulfilled. So for you, does it make sense? How is your inner child showing up to the work you're doing today?
Yeah, that's such an awesome question. I remember as a middle schooler, and I'm not sure if it started before then, but I loved to write stories back then. I would write my family poems for their birthday, and I would write little stories and give those away as gifts for presents. So I always enjoyed writing, and I loved being on stage. So I did acting and I did speech and I did mock trial. And, I do a lot of keynote speaking. And of course, you're on stage as a yoga teacher and a leadership coach working with a team. So those aspects of what came naturally to me in elementary, middle, and high school are absolutely showing up here today. And I think about, my even younger years. I loved, I had so many imaginary friends and I just kind of built these communities and these stories that I would play out by myself and with friends. And so it was this sort of creation of community in a way and creation of story. And I use a lot of story to teach and be relatable in my work. And so that's an aspect that I think shows up for me as an adult now. And yes, I had a love for nature and wonder and noticing the magic in those moments. And as much as I can, I'm absolutely bringing that back to my life, just how I live my life every day, but how I live my life contributes to the energy that I'm able to share with my clients in my writing or my, face to face or on a Zoom call.
Sarah, you've alluded to this, but I'm wondering if you could speak just a bit more about it. Work-life balance. Um, what is that? How do you define that? Again, you have spoken to it, you've given bits and pieces to it, but I want to ask you directly, what's your thinking on that? How has your thinking evolved? How have you seen your clients change because of the way that they found that balance? And I know some people don't like the terminology work-life balance. I don't care about vernacular, but just that thinking about who I am at home and who I can be at home versus who I am at work, who I can be at work. Can you speak to that and maybe
Sure.
what that looks like now post COVID and what you've seen? I know that's a lot to throw at you, but just
Sure.
general ideas.
Yeah, yes. So absolutely. A lot of people think that balance is not real, that it's a myth, that there's no such thing.
Mhm.
And I like to look at balance, like we talked about very briefly earlier, as the correct proportions, or a different definition of balance, if you look in the dictionary, is to remain upright and steady. So you're managing yourself so that when life knocks you to your knees, because that's going to happen to all of us at different times, you're able to get back up and be who you want to be. And I don't like to call it work-life balance. I prefer to say life balance because there are so many aspects of what makes us human and who we are. So it's really about just overall balance and understanding, what that means to us specifically, because what I write about in the book and teach my clients is so many of us are trying to achieve success, but we're going towards a success that someone else has given us, whether that's society or our parents or the company that we're working for, versus really what is it? What does success look like for me? What does my ideal life look like? What does joy, how do I feel joy? And how can I work towards creating that so that I feel balanced? But also, we tend to think that balance is about time and energy management. And yes, there are absolutely aspects of that that we need to do in order to create balance. But what I have found has created balance for myself and for my clients is really more of this emotional and relational balance. Because a lot of us are carrying emotional baggage from our childhood or work, or we're not addressing conflict. There's a ton of data that shows that most leaders aren't even comfortable addressing conflict with their teams. So we're carrying all of this emotional baggage, which just makes us feel exhausted and heavy and makes everything feel harder than it needs to be. We also are falling prey to those shoulds and other people's expectations that I just mentioned. And we also have what I call a bogus belief, which is a limiting belief or a false belief about ourselves that impacts how we show up. And that is really, if there were just one piece that I would work with my clients and recommend any to work on to create balance, it's we have to deconstruct this bogus belief. It's anything from I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm too much, I'm a failure, I'm too short, I'm too tall, I didn't go to the right school, I live in the wrong neighborhood, I'm an imposter, whatever it is. Every single person that I've ever worked with, including very successful C-level executives of Fortune 100 organizations, have a bogus belief that snakes its way through our lives. And maybe I could share, my example to help cement this for you and your listeners a little bit. Would that be okay?
Of course, whatever you want to share.
Okay. So, my bogus belief was, or is, because it can still show up, is I am alone and I'm not wanted. And a few different ways that showed up in my life. And the bogus belief comes from our childhood experiences, whether it's, capital T trauma or little t trauma. It's really the meaning that we give experiences in our life before the age of 7. And, our brains aren't fully formed at that age. So we're trying to make sense of the world and we create this bogus belief about ourselves. So I believed that I was alone and not wanted. And that showed up for me in high school by doing a lot of drugs and partying, because as soon as I was in the party crowd, I was immediately wanted. It made me feel like I belonged. It showed up for me in my corporate career where I didn't accept help from my managers, even when they offered it, when they could tell that I was drowning in work. I had to do everything myself. I had to be a perfectionist. I was a high performer, but I was working more hours than anyone else in my job. So I felt like I wasn't wanted. And so I was trying to prove that I was wanted. And that led to my burnout because I was really overdoing what needed to be done in order to have success in my career. And this also showed up in my relationship with my husband. Because I was afraid that I wasn't wanted, I only put one foot in the door of our marriage, thinking that if I just, committed partly to this relationship, then it wouldn't hurt so bad if he decided he didn't want to be married to me anymore. And so you could understand that if you're only halfway committed to a relationship, it's not going to work out, right? And so this lie showed up in all aspects of my life, and I had to deconstruct it, understand where it came from, and start to shift to a more empowered belief about myself so that I could make decisions in my world from this empowered place that eventually led me to balance, to living a life that, of course, there's challenging times and there's busier times and less busy times, but it's really about this emotional, personal, inner balance that creates external balance in our worlds.
That was beautiful. You put it, it was beautiful, just the way that you laid it out. I've shared a similar story here about how I felt in the past, how it's shown up in the way that I operate today, that you do recognize it, that you know that it's kind of just the story that you're telling yourself, and each person finds their way to work through it. And it's incredible. That's why I asked that question. I think it was a similar story to yours. I think we all have stories like that with varying circumstances, details, backstory. But it was a story that was told like that that made me ask the next question that'll be coming up. But also, no, this childhood question as well as the next one. Um, because I found in so many of the stories that I've heard, so many of the lives that I've heard about, that that was the case, and that the good work that the people were doing, that my guests are doing today, stems out of the way that they felt then, in so many ways and whatever it looked like for each person. But when they come out of those traumas or atypical childhoods or disrupted childhoods, that there's something that just makes them a bit more sensitive to the world, and it opens them up to the world. And so much of their work is informed by those experiences. So it's incredible. It's nothing we may feel in the past like it's not something we want to go through at that time, but if we can take those lessons away now as adults and inform our decisions, our work, our businesses, our approach to community and helping others, it's powerful. I mean, it has a purpose. It serves a purpose now.
Absolutely. And what we need to recognize from neuroscience is that our brains are wired to keep us alive. Our brains want survival is its top mission. And the way that our brain does that is it creates patterns of information so that it can be use all of its other energy to be on the lookout for danger. And when we were
Yeah.
our earliest ancestors had a lot more danger, like a saber-toothed tiger or someone from an opposing tribe coming to steal our
Yeah.
food, and that meant literal life or death. But our brains are still wired that way. And so what that means is that we are pattern making machines. We live what I call permeating patterns. And these experiences from our childhood teach us what we believe about ourselves, and then we recreate those experiences in our adult life because that's what our brain knows. And so neuroscience, different research estimates that we spend anywhere from 85 to 95% of our time in our subconscious, just operating on autopilot in the way that we lead others, in the way that we communicate, in the choices that we make. And so we have to see when this bogus belief is leading our life and move out of our subconscious into our conscious mind to make a decision that supports, our highest self or who we want to be. But that requires us to see that story first of all, notice when we're there like you were talking about, and then to start choosing something different. And every time we do, we start to shift the neural pathways so that we can live in more alignment with our highest self.
Let me know if this is too personal. I don't know if it's IP, but what are your steps for that? When you notice you may be, because I think one of the best things that you said more or less was, it still happens from time to time. Even though we're coaches, even though this is the work, we're always thinking about how to improve our performance, whatever it may be. No one's perfect. Coaches need coaches, therapists need therapists. So, without giving away the store, if it is some kind of IP for you, what's your process for if you kind of sense that that's starting to happen? What are some steps that you take?
Sure. So before I answer that question, I want to say that what I have personally found and also found with my clients is that, this bogus belief we really have for our entire lifetime. And that every time that we're ready to up level to a higher level of success, whether that's a new relationship or starting a new business or moving to a higher level of success in our business or our leadership, that I find our bogus belief shows up again at a different level, at a different layer of
Mm.
wisdom, right? So we've maybe addressed it at our current state, but if we want to turn our own personal thermostat up and have more success, we have to address it now with this new consciousness that we have.
It is a shadow that follows you. It's just there. It's part of your story.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So go ahead.
Yeah, and so it's just recognizing that it's there, and the first always most important step to start to overcome it is to see that it's there, to see that it's showing up. And so once we, you know, my clients work with me and we help to identify what is that bogus belief. Once we know what that is and we know how that shows up in our life and we are more present in our life, that helps us to start to be aware when it is impacting our decisions. So first of all, we have to identify that bogus belief and where it came from and deconstruct it to understand that that's not really the truth. That was just the story that we told ourselves way back when that made us feel like we were not whole, we weren't good enough, we weren't worthy, whatever it was. So there is the identification of it and the deconstruction of it. And then we also need to be just more present, conscious humans. And we can do this through things like meditation, our tools that help us to learn how to observe our thoughts so that we can recognize when we are in a thought pattern that's not supporting us, that can help us be more present to what's going on in our life. And for having that awareness. And then it's thinking about, okay, this is where I'm showing up. Who is it that I want to be? Who do I have to become to achieve this next goal, to become my highest self, and start to visualize? And even, I will sometimes tell myself like stop or neural pathway or change when I hear myself telling myself things that I don't want to be the truth about me. And then I will immediately say something that's different. So if I was thinking, gosh, I'm no good at this. If I notice that I'm telling myself that, if I'm trying something new in my business, I'll stop and be like, change. I don't want to, or neural pathway. Don't want to believe that. What's a more empowering thought that I could say? It would be, well, I'm getting better at this every day, or I'm learning more how to do this every day. And so it's the awareness and then shifting towards the vision that you're going in. And, part of that process, that healing process of the deconstructing the belief really does come from being witnessed by someone else, because we need to witness our own inner child that wasn't witnessed way back then, that was kind of quieted down and replaced with this bogus belief. And it's an even more profound experience when you have someone like a community or a coach or a therapist to witness that part of you as well.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. It is amazing how when we sense that we're going down that path, how we can call out our own bullshit. It's incredible where it's just kind of like, and like you said, just talking to yourself. You know, there are
Yeah,
moments
it's like
where I
these
call,
conversations in our head where we're, one of the psychology terms for that is reparenting ourselves. What would a wise parent with a lot of tools say to me in the moment that maybe I didn't hear from my very well-intentioned parents earlier? Just different ways of having those conversations with ourselves. And I think that this also leads into a lot of the work that I do with leadership teams, because we also need others to be a mirror for us, especially when we're ready to go to that next level, because no matter how self-aware we are, we can't always see our blind spots. And so part of the emotional intelligence work when we're looking at leadership is getting feedback from others so that we can understand, well, am I really showing up in these meetings the way that I think I am? How are my words coming across to others? Do people really trust me even though I think I'm being a trustworthy person? And so we need other people to give us feedback and be those mirrors so we can continue to see where we need to grow to as well, to help us build that awareness.
Sarah, I had read that your training in emotional intelligence was a Harvard program. And I forgot to ask you, at what point in your career, your journey, was that program? Did you attend that program? Was that program in your history, your education history? Not sure if it was like graduate school or if it was a program while you were already working in corporate. Can you just share a little bit about that and how you ended up there?
Yeah, so I really, all of the work that I had been doing was geared around aspects of emotional intelligence. And then, maybe around the pandemic time period, I took some adult education at Harvard. So I took some on campus and some of it was virtual. That was a dream of mine as a child, to go to Harvard, even though I never applied, which, I wish I would have had the confidence to even apply and see what would have happened, but I didn't. So it was a full circle moment to be able to attend Harvard as an adult. And I was taking a leadership excellence program certification. And that certification had a lot of emotional intelligence training in it. And I remember going to this, day-long emotional intelligence class in Cambridge on campus and just being so excited to be a Harvard student. I was staying, in the dorms. So I felt like what it would have felt like if I would have gone there back for undergrad. And everything that the professor was teaching me around emotional intelligence was exactly what I was teaching others and had learned through, my decade of my journey. And so Harvard really gave me the term emotional intelligence and taught me some different frameworks of teaching it in a leadership capacity. But it was really this aha moment of, oh, this is what I've been doing all along. This is what I've been teaching all along. This is the term for it.
That's incredible. That's incredible just to go back there, like you said, fulfilling that lifelong just dream aspiration. And it's amazing to show up there when you've already had so much experience in the world, where you would look at this topic differently than if you had gone straight from high school. So
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
awesome that you have those kind of insights when you show up there. Sarah, what
Mhm.
do you consider your superpower?
So I'm wanting to say I have two superpowers, but really my superpower is to take this complex information and present it in a simple way that is memorable. And that leads into what I would consider my other superpower is, I really use my own story and my own personal experiences to to teach and to meet people where they're at. So I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, really. But they have made me who I am today, and I've loved and forgiven and accepted those aspects of myself. And so that gives me a fierce compassion for others and for loving them, mistakes, warts and all, and seeing their greatness. So it's this ability to simplify these concepts in a way that people can understand and meet humans really on a heart to heart basis to invite them to step more fully into their power.
And now, Sarah, before we jump into your book, last question before we do that, what does leadership mean to you? What does great leadership look like?
Leadership is
Mm.
such a privilege. It creates a ripple effect out into the world. We are impacting so many people as a leader, and whether you have an official leadership title, whether you're officially a manager of others or just the way that you're showing up with the team that you work with, you're still a leader. And so I believe it's about harnessing the good in others in order to lift them up to be up to bigger and better things in this world. And was there a second part of your question that I didn't answer?
No, I mean, just I usually ask, what does leadership mean? And then what just great leadership look like? If you wanted to give an example from your past, from your history of a great leader and what made them so, that'd be great if somebody stands out.
Sure. I think, I'm so lucky to hear all kinds of stories of great leaders when I'm working with the leadership teams that I coach. And it always goes back to some sort of personal connection. It's always something like, this person believed in me. This person helped me when I was in a hard time. This person did not micromanage me and instead they empowered me. This person was understanding. This person really practiced what they preached and they stood for balance and they represented what that looked like. So and I even do some experiments around this in the leadership trainings that I do, but it's always around this human to human connection and being able to see the other person as a human versus a means to an end, a means to accomplishing whatever the goal of the business is. So empathy and having that relationship are examples of great leadership.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now we can jump into the book. Why don't you've put up the book a few times. Why don't you introduce the book, the full title, and just tell us a bit about the book itself?
So the full title is The Balanced Life Blueprints: Revive Your Marriage, Parent with Presence, and Create Feel-Good Success at Work plus Home. And it is a book that really guides you through the same process or a very similar process that I take some of my coaching clients through, we are starting with ourself and just looking at, what is it that I want out of my life? What does success actually look like to me? How do I create an affirmation for who it is that I want to become? I call it a daily affirmation, but it's really this sort of mission statement of who we want to be, so that we're starting to shift those neural pathways that I talked about earlier to becoming that highest self. And then we work on time management, energy management, taking care of our physical health, because we really need to, be in our body physically healthy in order to show up powerfully, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We move through deconstructing that bogus belief and replacing it with an empowered thought. And then how to be in relationship with others. So, how can I clean up relationships, both personally and professionally, that are carrying all this emotional baggage in my life? I offer a few different cleanup conversation scripts and methodologies to follow. How can I show up as a present parent where I'm really honoring my child in front of me rather than trying to project my own insecurities or my own unlived dreams from my own childhood onto them, honoring them as the sovereign being that they are? How can I take ownership for the way I show up in my marriage, to shift the marriage, looking at our marriage like a dance and thinking that if one partner starts to use some different dance moves, the other one will likely follow suit. Not always, but it's more likely to try when we, of course, start with ourselves, because we're really the only person we can change. And then really what all of this does is it's kind of stripping away the layers of an onion and pulling back what's our false self, what's not real about us, and helping us to land in our most empowered self. And then what's beautiful is we really at that point find our community and co-create a community that we love and identify what our purpose is. Because once we've gotten rid of all that false stuff, it's like our purpose is right there. And that's what I found doing this work, is that my work was really to share this message with others. But we need to get rid of all that isn't authentically ourselves in order to end up there. So I know that was a lot, and then kind of walked you through the entire many, many chapters of the book, but that's sort of
That's
the
all right.
process that we go through within the book.
So you had mentioned you had been blogging for years, that you eventually you wanted to get to writing a book. When it comes time to really sit down to start putting it together, everything you laid out now about how you wanted to, or how you laid it out, how did you come up with that? What was the process for you in kind of setting up the book and how you wanted to walk the reader through? Was it always going to be just an overview of balance across work, parenthood, marriage? Or did those kind of come in at different times? Was that your plan, to cover all those areas in the one book?
Yes. So that was the biggest, the most important things to me in when I was going through this process was, how do I show up for my children? How do I show up for my career? And how do I show up in my marriage? And so I knew that those aspects had to be addressed. But before we could get to any of that, we had to go inward and focus on ourselves. And so I kind of made a mind map of all of the process that I had been through. I went through all my old journals and looked at the exercises that I had done and just remembered the different ones that made me go, aha, and learn something new about myself. And those were from all the different programs I had taken and teachers I had studied with and yoga teacher training. So I kind of started piecing them together. I had a big, I actually realized that for me, it was easier to do more visually. So I had Post-it notes and I started putting them up on a big bulletin board. And then I started grouping them together in sections that made sense. And then I started moving them. And that's how I figured out the flow of my coaching program and the chapters of my book. So that visual process really helped me. And, it then became, well, how can I break these down into different sections? So I have, belief systems, I have vitality, and then I have relationships, and then I have really living this. Those are sort of the 4 sections of the book to make it a little bit more of a easier journey for someone new to understand what they're going to go through.
Can you just go through each of those sections and just give some of the chapter titles just to kind of get a deeper sense of that path that you take readers on?
Yes. So part one is belief systems for balance and feel good success. And so it's about chapter one, cultivating awareness and authenticity. It's about establishing and affirming a success mindset. So moving into that radical responsibility that I talked about, taking full ownership for every single outcome of your life, identifying your bogus belief, which we've talked about, removing your hurt armor, which is the
Mm,
defense mechanisms that our bogus belief requires us to show up as, but that's holding us
yeah.
back from success. And then the process of releasing your bogus belief. So that's part one. Part two are vitality essentials. And these are more of, often the common things that people will speak about when they're talking about balance and well-being. But this is about enhancing your physical space. So making sure that you are getting rid of clutter and that your physical body feels good, enhancing your mind space. So this is where I talk about the power of meditation and really creating a mindful approach to time management and choosing how you manage your energy and your time. And then part three is where we're creating balanced relationships for feel good success. And this is where we look at parenting, where we look at communicating to establish connection, where we are cleaning up our relationships that I talked about and clearing out that emotional baggage, how we're strengthening spouse partnership and intimacy, and how we're becoming a present parent. And then finally, part four is living a balanced life that you love. And we're opening up to abundance and prosperity. We're creating community, and we are aligning with purpose in those different chapters that move through those areas.
Yeah, and I haven't read, full disclosure to the audience, I haven't read the book. I look forward to reading the book only because I feel it would have helped me across all of those areas, trying to navigate everything, whether it's work, whether it is marriage, whether it is other relationships, whether it is your kids. I think each of us tries to go through it as best we can, with good intentions, with love in our heart, with commitment, with work ethic when it comes to the work piece. But I do love how the book is not overly niche, where it's just focus on kids or focus on marriage or balancing outside versus the work. It is kind of like a full complement of who the person is, of who the professional is reading this, trying to figure out, because I mean, the world that we're operating in and working in is much different than the world that our parents came up in. Like that was it was still hard for them, absolutely, but it was a very different world. So there is no script for what we're delving in, what we're operating in, what we're emoting in.
Mhm.
Um, it has been one of the most anxious times in my life, the balance of work, business, family, kids, marriage. Um, so, you're trying to do the best you can. You sort these things out that we've spoken about, what you need to do to get rid of or work within that baggage that you're carrying from childhood. But I do love the fact that it is a combination of all these different areas that most of us are navigating through, trying to navigate through.
Yeah. Well, and it's, the common denominator is ourselves, right? And as much as we try to compartmentalize, who we show up, even if we go to work and that's professional, if we're having a problem with our kids or we're struggling in our marriage, that's going to impact how we're showing up at work.
Yeah.
Or if we're having way too much stress at work, that's going to impact how we show up as a parent or in our relationships or even our physical health. So for me, I couldn't just focus on one. Really, all of these aspects have to be optimized, for
Yes.
lack of a better word, in order to feel balanced, because one area will impact the other. And across the board. And so that's why it's a continual, you don't just get balanced and you stay there. It's a continual process of growing and evolving and shifting and changing and focusing, right? And that's just the aspect of life. And even if you think about a yoga pose, a balancing yoga posture like tree pose that a lot of people are familiar with, it might look like you're not moving and you're, quote unquote, holding a balanced pose, but really your muscles are twitching, your body is moving slightly, and you're continually moving and shifting, even though it might look like you're holding a pose without and being balanced, right? And so it's this continual shift, but recognizing that every aspect of ourself goes into success that trickles out into all areas of our life.
Yes. And I think it's amazing how you're saying that it's always evolving. So, anybody that has work and or kids and spouse, work and or kids and spouse and whatever else, knows that even if you are working well for yourself to make all those things balanced, whatever it may mean to you, even though you may have a system, you may have an approach to it, from day to day, it's going to look different. So
Mhm.
one day you may be able to handle better than the next day that just kind of went completely in the opposite direction. So it's an evolution as we go, but I mean, it's an evolution every day. Every day is just going to be that much different from the previous one.
Right. And it really requires going back to what we spoke about earlier about being intentional about what we're wanting to create and operating in our conscious brain versus just operating on autopilot and just keeping doing things the way that we're doing. Because that's, one of the biggest blessings that I've gotten from the work that I do and that I see in my clients is just taking a moment to pause the busyness of our life and check in. Am I happy? Is this work fulfilling? Am I healthy? Am I doing what I want? Just pausing and saying, where am I right now? Let me check in with myself. And then
Yeah.
let me start making choices that align with who I want to be. That's so powerful to
Yeah.
get us into those conscious responses and intentions for life versus just habitually reacting based on what we already know.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you said before, where I think most of us were trying to work towards an image that is standard for everybody, what success looks like. So in the past, you may have achieved success. It was what everybody saw, but inside you were like that duck, like floating on the water, looked pristine and beautiful above
Mhm.
water, but under the surface, you're paddling for your life. Now I think there is this growing understanding that the success is one thing, but if you don't have the fulfillment to go along with it, that peace in your mind, that peace in your heart, that checking in with yourself every once in a while, that's where we get to burnout. That's where we go to dissatisfaction. That's how we achieve unhappiness or reach unhappiness. So I appreciate the fact that you're talking about the work that goes into it. And it's, again, it's evolving day to day. It's never going to look the same.
Yeah, and I think, an example that your listeners might be able to relate with this is, even showing up how we want to show up as a friend or how we want to show up as a parent. So for me, I love doing experiences with my kids. I don't want to be involved in the PTA. I'm not the type of parent who's going to go overboard with the Cub Scout project, right? I'm going to let my kids kind of take the lead and we're going to do it and we're going to have fun with it, but I'm not going to spend 8 hours a week on the Cub Scout project. Whereas for some parents that might give them joy. So
Mhm.
it's like checking in, does going overboard and making all these cute snacks for your kids lunchbox give you joy, or are you just doing that because you want to post it on your Instagram page and say, hey, look at me, I'm a
Yeah.
great parent? I have friends that it does bring them joy. That doesn't bring me joy, but there are things that do. And so I'm involved with my kids field trips because I love doing that with them, but I'm not the parent mom, the room mom that goes in and helps read to the kids. I mean, I did that a little bit, but I'm like picking and choosing
Yeah.
what I enjoy versus just saying yes to all the things or doing all the things because I want to look like the good mom or because I see other parents doing it and I'm trying to be like them and I'm seeking validation. It's really let me understand what's important to me and validate myself. And it doesn't matter what other people think as long as I'm happy. That's why I
Mhm.
put feel good success in the title of this book. It should feel good to us,
Yeah.
not look good to others.
No, I agree. That's a I didn't have that in mind when I spoke about that previous generation of our parents versus us, but there is that. There completely is that. There's the people that go overboard posting every little perfect thing about their kids. And the thing with social media is we all know those people, not specifically with kid stuff showing, but we know people that online everything is perfect and then behind the curtain they're falling apart. They're not it's not even highlight reels. It's just kind of the quick moments they can put up, but they're not happy internally. So that's yet another pressure that I guess this time that we're coming up in may put on certain people. I'm with you where to me it's kind of like if you're showing things online, I question why you're showing it. You know, if it really is to genuinely share, great. If it's to check off a box that you have to kind of whatever the keeping up with the Joneses of social media is, that's kind of like where you're going to burn out because you feel that you have to keep up with posting all these things. But like you said, to each their own. I mean, as long as you as a parent realize what fires you up, what makes you happy. I'm always curious and ask people what makes you so happy that you could do it, get lost in flow, and even if you didn't share or tell anybody about it,
Yeah.
you could still feel that happiness. You could still feel that flow. But I think so many
Mhm.
people assign happiness to it because they're able to share it with other people in terms of social media and pictures
Yeah.
and whatnot. But I'm always curious, like, what is it that makes you completely happy where if you didn't share with anybody else, you would still do it? It'd make you completely happy. So I'm glad you
Yeah,
brought up the social media
absolutely.
because I think that's huge.
Yes. And, I share things about my children on social media
Oh,
every
of
once in a
course. Same
while as
here.
well. I've
Yeah.
got family that follows me, but when our children become so for so many of us, our children or our career become our identity or both, right? And then we lose sight
Yeah.
of who we are. And so those are the people who are often coming to me later in life and saying, why am I not happy? I have the retirement. I have the perfect picture on our holiday card. I've got all these things. I'm checking off the boxes, but I lost myself along the way. Right. And so that's why the first part of this book is really connecting into who I am. And, we don't want to project our own experiences onto our children because, like I mentioned before, they're their own sovereign beings. And really, when we can live in joy and role model that to our children, that is going to be most impactful for them versus shoving them into all the sports and the activities and giving and making them do all the stuff that we didn't get to do or we think is going to look good. So it
Yeah.
really all comes back to let me be good with myself internally and things will fall in line externally when I first and
Yeah.
foremost point that finger at myself.
Yeah. I mean, just sticking with the kid thing for a bit, to me, it's almost like it doesn't matter all those extracurricular whatevers, whatever that people may go overboard with. Um, my parents never did any of that. They were immigrants to this country. It was a different culture. They had to work multiple jobs, but we had love. There was never any doubt that even though we didn't have most things that other kids had, there was love. So as long as you're showing your kids, that you're there for them, it's a very tricky time growing up for us, and it's even trickier for them. So, and I mean that's a
Mhm.
whole different episode, but I appreciate your insights on it. Sarah,
Yeah.
just a few more questions to wrap up. So I'm curious for you in writing this book, what changed in you? You obviously this was all your knowledge you were putting together, years of writing your blog. But in the process of writing this book, and not the editing or writing process, but what maybe the way you looked at the material, the subject matter, did anything evolve or change in you as a circumstance, as a result of this book being put out there?
Yes. So two significant things. The first one, I was very proud of the work when I went back and read it, and just being able to put something out into the world that I'm super proud of and I
Yeah.
know has helped and will continue to help so many people was just very confidence building, for myself and for my business. And also, when I published this book, it was, I share my story along with the methodology to get to balance. And I share some things that I hadn't shared that, maybe only one or two other people had ever heard or known about me. And I really kind of lay my life and my story out vulnerably in this book because I know that others will be able to connect with it and it will inspire others. And that was a layer of authenticity that felt amazing once I finally published the book. It was like all these things are out there. I've
Yeah.
worked through any shame that I had on them. I am embracing them and I'm sharing them, knowing that it's going to help others. But what that started doing that became really significant is it made me start looking at my current life and checking in and saying, okay, so now where am I not being authentic? Now what feels off? Now what do I need to shift to be more in alignment with my authentic self? And so I've had a lot of personal changes really over the last, since the book came out, because of that. So it sparked my next evolution that will probably be book number 3 for me. Number 2 or 3.
No, I love that next evolution. I think
Mhm.
people have this idea that once they graduate college, they get into their career, they've been in that career for 20 years or whatever, or they have a family and they get settled down and they're living in the suburbs or wherever. I think it stops there and then they kind of just coast to retirement. But I like the way you put it that there can be a next evolution. Sarah,
Yes.
so today we're talking about your book. What's one book that would stand out to you that you've read, your favorite book, your most impactful book? What is it? If you were to come back on to share another book that's not yours, which book do you think it would be?
Oh my goodness.
This is like the pressure cooker question that every guest gets. I love this is when they
Ah.
look most nervous or unsure.
So I read 40 to 50 books a year. I love so many different genres, from leadership to spirituality to parenting to so much. But I think, the one that's coming up for me is Melody Beattie's Journey to the Heart. It is not, it's a book of daily passages. And it's a book that I gift my clients in one of my coaching programs with, because it was the book that was sort of like my Bible when I was going through this process that I wrote about. And I would just randomly open to a page in that book, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. It was spiritual messages. It was all about, it's called Journey to the Heart. So connecting to your authenticity, making decisions from the heart, learning and loving and leading that way. And so that's my book that's probably the most damaged, just from opening it and reading it and
Dog
using it so many
ears.
times.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So beautiful book.
So you've kind of gone into it, but what do you think is next for your writing? Is it about writing about your next evolution, the resulting learning that you've had or experienced from this book?
So I think my next book is going to be very emotional intelligence leadership focused. So it'll be sort of the next stage of this, that's very much on, it's essentially the day-long workshop that I give to leadership teams will be that in book format. So EQ specifically for how we show up and lead a team will be number 2. And then I think I'm sort of still in the process of this evolution that I'm going through now, but I would like to write about that next. That's probably going to be more of the passion project. So who knows? It could jump ahead of the EQ book, but I still think I'm kind of in it. I'm sort of at the end of it, but I'm still kind of in it yet to begin writing.
How old are your kids, Sarah?
Almost 9 and almost 11.
Okay. Okay. So that's much different than younger ages. Now they're more self-sufficient. You have a bit more
Yes.
time. You don't have to. It's incredible. I have a 9, 6, and a 3-year-old. So it's incredible
Okay.
seeing them jump from phase to phase.
Mhm.
When they become a little more self-sufficient, you kind of start getting a piece of your soul back because you're
Yeah.
not kind of hovering around them. So
Yep.
yeah, looking forward to your writing. And
Thank
now in
you.
wrapping up, what are you up to these days? What do you want to share about anything you may have coming up, or anything that I didn't ask about? Anything you want to share? The floor is yours.
Well, the best way to stay in touch with, I do trainings every once in a while online because I like to share more community-based content with my community. So these are webinars or challenges. Those are always going to be available on my website, which is joydiscovered.com. And yeah, I've got all kinds of little things in the work, but I think that's important to share for right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again,
Thank
we
you.
covered Sarah's book, The Balanced Life Blueprint: Revive Your Marriage, Parent with Presence, and Create Feel Good Success at Work plus Home. Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. I do have one other thing I'd like to add, if that's okay. I
Absolutely.
just remembered it. So I do have an audio version of my book that your readers are welcome to download if they're interested in what we've talked about. And I'm assuming if they made it this far in the podcast, they are. And so they can access that for free at bookforbalance.com/audio. And again, that's bookforbalance.com/audio. And there's the audio files to my book for free.
Perfect. Thank you, Sara.
Absolutely.
And if there's anything I might have missed, let me know. There's so much to cover, limited time. But if there's something you're curious about, I can reach out to Sara, see what kind of additional guidance, insight, knowledge, wisdom she can share. But thank you for coming to this conversation. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.